Your eighth quiz is on Chapter 13 entitled Monopoly and Antitrust Policy. In this chapter, we're going to be analyzing an industry that we can refer to as pure monopoly. You'll recall in the previous quiz, we analyzed an industry that we called perfect competition. Actually, I prefer to call it pure competition, because the only factor that's going to influence the behavior of a buyer or a seller in that industry is the price. Now, therefore, pure competition means pure price competition. The firm is what we would call a price taker. It has no control over the price it charges. That price is set by the market supply versus the market demand. If the firm tries to charge even a penny more than the other firms, it will sell none, because the other firms are selling a homogeneous product for a lower price. And so in a purely competitive industry, or as the authors call it, perfectly competitive industry, the only factor that motivates the behavior of any market participant is the price. And as a result, in equilibrium, we get both allocative and productive efficiency. Pure monopoly is the exact opposite. In a pure monopoly, there's no competition. As a matter of fact, there's only one seller. Now, in real life, the term monopoly is defined for legal purposes by the courts, and antitrust legislation and things like that is defined as an industry where a firm has significant market power, and that is, it can manipulate the price of a product by manipulating the market supply. If it cuts back on its output, the market supply will go down and the price therefore will go up. Or if it increases its supply, the market supply will go up and the price will go down. You'll recall that no firm in a perfectly competitive industry had any market power whatsoever. It was such a small, insignificant portion of the total that if it produced more, this would be like adding a few grains of sand to a large beach. Or if it produced less, taking a few grains of sand home with you in your shoes. That would not affect the beach whatsoever. And so the purely competitive firm is a price taker. Not the case with a pure monopolist. Why? Because in the case where there's only one seller, the firm and the market are the same. So the firm can influence the market supply and thus the price by changing its own output. So in real life, monopoly is defined to be a firm with that kind of market power that can manipulate the market supply and thereby manipulate the price. In real life, even if there was only one firm in the industry, as would be the case with pure monopoly, in real life, even in an industry where there is only one firm, generally the government is going to regulate it. It's going to set its price, it's going to set its output, or some combination of the two. In our hypothetical pure monopoly, we have one seller with no government interference whatsoever. So the firm is free to do what it can, within legal limits of course, to maximize its profit. It can adjust the output and adjust price in such a way so as to maximize the profit. So unlike a purely competitive firm, a pure monopolist is a price setter rather than a price taker. It can set its own price, its own output, in order to maximize its profits. So, what we are going to see when we get around to analyzing a pure monopolist is that those efficiencies, the productive efficiency and the allocative efficiency, do not exist at equilibrium. Neither one. Whereas both exist in a purely competitive firm, they don't exist in a pure monopoly. And for that reason, pure competition would be preferable to pure monopoly. Now, monopolies exist for one reason. there are barriers to entry. Were there no barriers to entry, anytime a firm was making an economic profit, other firms would enter and compete with that firm. But the reason that there is a monopoly is because of barriers to entry. Now, there are three basic categories of barriers to entry. The first would be, we might call, financial barriers. Financial barriers occur when it becomes extremely expensive to start a firm. You know, if it takes $10 billion, for example, to start a firm, that's going to be a significant deterrent from me entering the industry. I can't raise $10 billion. So I'm going to be, for that reason, dissuaded from entering the industry. Or, for example, if the automobile manufacturing firms were making profits hand over fist, it would be difficult for me to enter into that industry because it takes several $billion to start up a plant. It takes several $billion to become an economy of scale, that is, to produce at a point where my average total cost is minimized. So that's one type of barrier, financial barrier. Another type of barrier would be a natural barrier. Now, the term natural monopoly is described on page 278 in the text. A natural monopoly exists in such cases as a cable TV company or an electric utility or something like that. Once again, it's described on page 278, and the reason they exist is because it's actually more efficient in these exceptional cases to have one firm produce the product rather than many competing firms. It makes a better use of society's scarce resources if one rather than many firms produce the product. And finally, there are legal barriers. These are barriers imposed by government, oftentimes in the form of patents or licenses or permits or whatever other miscellaneous type of regulation the government may impose. The authors also mention a couple of other type barriers. One, of course, is when you have sole access to an important factor of production, for land, for example. Another they refer to as network externalities, and network externalities are described on page 280. The problem, however, with our capitalist system is that over time, industries tend to become less competitive rather than more competitive. There are a number of reasons, but one primary and perfectly legitimate reason is technological progress. Technological progress causes machinery to replace labor. Technological progress is often labor-saving and causes the firms to become more capital intensive. As they become more capital intensive, the startup costs become greater. And as the startup costs become greater, there become larger and larger and larger financial barriers to entry. And so, over time, firms tend to become larger and larger and larger, but each industry tends to be characterized by fewer and fewer and fewer firms. 100 years ago, for example, there were 100 automobile companies, domestic automobile companies. Today, there are only 3. But each one is much, much, much larger than the firms in the automobile industry of 100 years ago. The problem is that as firms become larger, they become less efficient because they are less competitive. But they also become more efficient because they're able to take advantage of technological change and economies of scale. What do we do about it? Well, as long as the growth and the size of the firm is legitimate and organic, we like it because as technology progresses, goods and services become cheaper and better. However, if they do it in an illegitimate way, this is when we want to stop them, and we prevent that inorganic, illegitimate type of growth in the size of a firm through antitrust legislation. I'll come back with another video in a few, immediately, and we will analyze the purely competitive industry. Purely monopolistic industry.